All right, today we're going to look at the freedom of speech. But before I get going, one important distinction we have to make here is the First Amendment freedom of speech protects you from the government. It does not protect you from any private entity's response to your speech. Example, very often celebrities or sports athletes and so forth will say something or get caught on camera doing something, that, and they'll lose their job. They'll either you get fired from a TV show, or they'll lose endorsements and so forth. An example of this is the Duck Dynasty guy. The Duck Dynasty guy, if you remember from a couple years back, it was a show on A&E about this group of Louisiana duck hunters, this family, and they were very religious, and the guy spoke out against same-sex marriage. Phil, I think his name is Phil Robertson, I think his name was, spoke out against same-sex marriage. The sponsors of the show responded by pooling their sponsorship, and then A&E ended up suspending him from the show for him speaking out against same-sex marriage. Okay. So there's big public outcry. Oh, doesn't he have the First Amendment right? His rights are being violated. You have the freedom of speech. He can say whatever he wants. Yeah, he can say whatever he wants. But A&E also has a right to protect their brand, protect their business, and they have a right to fire Phil Robertson for what he was saying, and that's what he did. So you imagine you're working at a big box store. You're working at Lowe's. You go and you make a post online, and it's obvious that you work at Lowe's, and you say something like, all these customers are jerks. Well, if that comes to light and the Lowe's corporate entity sees that you are representing Lowe's and you're saying all the customers are jerks, you can be fired. Sure, you have the freedom to say that, but Lowe's has the ability to fire you for saying that. Okay, remember, it only is protecting you from the government. Okay, with that in mind, let's move on. You can really go down a rabbit hole with freedom of speech. There's many, many different forms of speech, many, many different situations, what can be restricted, what can't be restricted. But by and large, there's two parts of this. Freedom of expression. Okay, so that's art, music, spoken word, written word, memes, graphics, all that stuff. Okay, that's part of your freedom of expression. And then also, at the core of the First Amendment is your freedom to participate in public debate and discussion. Okay, so you're worried about something going on in your town or something the president's doing. Okay, you have the right to protest. Okay, the protesters in Harrisburg right now saying that the government should open. They have a right to protest. Okay. You have a right to speak out that you disagree with the government. That is at the core of our democracy, that we do not have a king that we cannot speak out against. Okay, so that is at its root the First Amendment. Okay, now this protects even unpopular speech. Okay, communists aren't very popular in America, but they have the right to spread communist propaganda. Okay, the Ku Klux Klan has a First Amendment right to spread their message of bigotry and hate. Okay, they have a right to do that. Okay, as long as they are not inciting violence and so forth, they have that right. So let's dig through some of this and see where we go. All right. Prior restraint basically means that in most circumstances, the government cannot proactively restrict your speech. They must react. Some exceptions to this would be school newspapers. The schools have the right to censor school newspapers. They have the right to censor what media is reaching prisoners in penitentiaries and so forth. Certain media could incite violence and so forth, so they can be restricted there. So moving on, that link there is broken. Okay, we see the Westboro Baptist Church here. Okay, it's not giving me the pointer. There's the Westboro Baptist Church. You might recognize those people. They protest soldiers' funerals and so forth. They have a right to do it. And you can look on the internet. There are literally hundreds of court cases discussing what is protected, what isn't protected. We're just going to scratch the surface of it here. Typically, political speech is the most protected speech. Again, it's because the root of the First Amendment is that you can speak out and disagree with the government. Okay, so we've discussed earlier that flag burning is protected speech. Okay, I don't know how effective it is of communicating your point, but at the end of the day, it is protected. Students have a right to political speech. So you have a right to political speech, and this was upheld in Tinker versus Des Moines. Okay, the two students there wanted to protest the Vietnam War by wearing those black armbands. The school suspended them for doing so. At that point, they said, "You're violating our First Amendment." It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, yes, students have a right to First Amendment political speech, even in schools, as long as it is not disruptive of as long as it's not disruptive of the learning environment. On a side note, not political speech, but you can also schools can censor vulgar language, obscenity, and so forth. In speeches and plays and whatnot. The school has the right to censor that because they have an overall responsibility of education, as opposed to your political speech or just general freedom of speech. Citizens United is a controversial ruling from the last, I'd say, 10 years or so. Basically, Citizens United was an effort by some corporations and so forth to be able to donate money to political campaigns and political action committees. Some people argued, hey, that a corporation isn't a person; it doesn't have First Amendment rights. But the Supreme Court upheld, no, a corporation has First Amendment rights, and in this instance, them giving their money to political action committees to further a political agenda is equivalent to speech. So corporations have the right to freedom of speech, and in this case, spend a lot of money on political campaigns if they choose to do so. It's not just corporations; it's organized labor, it's church groups, but any group, in essence, that has a wide funding base would then be able to use that money for political speech. All right. So what is not protected? So you are free to say what you want, but there are certain things you can't say. First of all, you can't incite violence. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater, causing a stampede. Old lady gets trampled. Well, guess what? You're held responsible for causing that stampede, getting that old lady trampled. If there wasn't actually a fire, you thought you were being funny, but someone died. Your speech caused that death. You're going to be held responsible. Some other things here: libel. Okay, and libel and slander are very similar. Libel is written word. Slander is spoken word. If you are purposely saying false or malicious information, you can be held accountable for that. Now, someone spreads a rumor about you in the hallways. You're not going to be able to sue them for libel, this has to do more with spreading of false information about public figures and so forth. Sedition and seditious speech. You can't try to incite a overthrow of the government. We have elections. That's how you turn over the government. You can also obviously look on the internet and find some other instances here. Some other topics along with this: commercial speech. Commercial speech can be restricted. We see advertisements on TV for prescription drugs, and then there's always a disclaimer at the end of all the side effects. Okay, that's required by the FCC or maybe the Food and Drug Administration, that they give the side effects at the end. When I was your age, there was tobacco and cigarette advertising everywhere. Okay, there's Joe Camel there. and he used to encourage you to smoke Camel cigarettes. Tobacco advertising has been restricted now. There are certain but that's part of an overall aspect here, an overall effort to get rid of tobacco. And they said, hey, tobacco advertising is just encouraging kids to smoke, and they restricted that type of advertising. So there are ways the government can restrict what's on television, what's on the radio, what's in advertising. At times there was obscenity laws, which have certainly been loosened over the last couple decades. But we see there are certain restrictions, and if you want to dig further, you'll find there's no shortage of information on that or on the internet. Picketing, is when workers or just people in general protest outside of a business. Okay, that is protected speech, and as long as you're not using it to set up some violence. So that's where we're going to be with the freedom of speech. Tried not to go too far down the rabbit hole here. There is literally hundreds of cases that you can find what is protected speech, what isn't. And if you're wondering about a specific thing, you can look it up. This is pretty far-reaching. I mean, it's dress codes, it's symbolic speech, it's you have the right to remain silent. Okay, not saying anything at all is actually part of the freedom of speech. So I encourage you to poke around, take the quiz, and hope you guys are all doing all right.